Hello everyone, this is Ben Ryder from the Academy of Gaming, Filming and Animation, and today what we're going to be looking at is how to get started with Unreal Engine 5. Now for those of you who are familiar with Unreal Engine 4, you won't find that there is a lot different, and for those of you who have used other game engines, you will find a lot of things follow a very similar convention. However, for those of you who are brand new, this might be a lot to take in, so don't worry if you don't know absolutely everything about everything that is on screen, because the main thing is just to follow along and become familiar with the overall space, how to move around in 3D space, and how to start adding in some interactive elements. So that's really what this is going to be about, is getting you started with those elements of working in the game engine, which are consistent across most game engines. So first of all, when you open up Unreal, you'll be presented with this project window. This project is where all of your assets will go. So it's where we will later bring in things from Unreal, from Maya, and animated assets and 3D models and sounds, and everything will go in this folder. So it's very important that we have a folder set out. It's also very important that you put this folder on the share drive into 2023 Engage Agfa, your name, where it says here student name, and then in there create a folder called Unreal Projects and make sure you put that in there. And then as well, give this first project your name as well, just so that we can find it easier, so that if we need to put in assets from outside, or if we need to compile from another directory, we know where to find it. So when we're in here, you want to go here to games, and we're going to start with third person. And the reason we're starting with third person is it gives us a sense of scale with the mannequin, and it also allows us to start looking at things involving the mannequin in terms of getting in animations and getting props onto a character. So it teaches us a lot. So even if you're not really a fan of third person games, I know that there's these other ones here, but this will give us all the assets to begin with to start learning some of those other fundamental skills of game design. So with that created, we're going to go ahead and create. This may take a while depending on if you've compiled all the shaders before. Even though Unreal is a real-time engine, it still needs some time to prepare and get things started. If you are waiting for something to do, I encourage you to make an Epic account. And with that Epic account, we'll then be able to access free assets that we can use in our game. The one that we use in this assessment is called the Advanced Village. Now it will claim that it's not compatible with Unreal Engine 5, however you can import it, and you just need to go through a few things to get it started, and we will look at how to do that shortly once the engine is started, and then we'll look at how to place assets into the level and how to get started with designing your first level. So before we do any of that, let's just give a bit of a tour of what we're looking at in this space. When you open up yours, you may not see this content browser, so I'm just going to get rid of that and go to what you will most likely see on your screen, which will be something like this. So this large screen here with the 3D viewport, we call that the viewport. If you left click with the mouse and move your mouse backwards and forwards, you will move backwards and forwards and turn to the left and right. If you hold down the right mouse button and then move your mouse, it will look up and around in all directions. And if you hold both mouse left and front, you'll be able to strafe left and right. So you should be able to move around your environment pretty easily with just those mouse movements. So just get some practice with that now and just moving around and orienting yourself. And once you're confident with that, we'll then start talking about the next part of what we can see in our workspace here. So in the top right-hand corner, we have what's known as the outliner, previously known as the world outliner. Basically, it tells us everything that is in this scene. Now, it may not look like much from the viewport, but behind the scenes, there are all of these other things like lighting, and player start and world data that's actually helping us to render this environment so that we can see it what it is. And we'll have a look at those things later, but I just want to show you how this interacts with the viewport. So for example, if I click on this cube here, you'll see that it not only highlights here, but also highlights in the world outliner. And it tells me exactly what type of object this is, a static mesh. And if I press F on the keyboard, it will focus in on that object. So another way of moving around the 3D environment is you can roll your mouse wheel up and down to zoom in on whatever you have selected. And you can also hold down the Alt key and then click the left mouse button and rotate around in order to be able to orbit around whatever you have selected. So if you find yourself getting lost and you don't know what you're looking at, you can just click on one of these objects in here, press F on the keyboard with your mouse in the viewport, and that will center your view back to one of these objects that you have selected. So that's just how we use the world outliner. We can also do things like hide certain things, pin them, group them, but just for now I just want you to be aware that this is where it is and that this represents everything that we can currently see in the scene. If we want to add something else into this scene, however, we'll need the content drawer. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we now have this content drawer. This gives us everything in the level that we can then start bringing in. So for example, if I click on here and click on starter content and then click on props, I can bring in this doorway just by dropping it right there. If I want to make sure this doesn't disappear, I can click here to dock the layout, which is similar to how people using Unreal Engine 4 would be used to. So if you want that, that's there. And if you want to undock it, just simply click away, and then you can use it the way it's intended to give you more view space for when you're working. When we have an object brought into the scene and we select it, we also have down here the details of that object. You may see something like this where it's got a map in here. If that happens, just click here on the tab of details. And this will give you everything that you need to know about this object, from the material that it's using, to its physics, to its collision profile, everything we need. We're not going to go through absolutely everything here. However, it is important when we do mention the details pane that this is what we're talking about and how to access it. So now that we've gone over most of what's in here in order to construct our level, let's go through how we can actually play it. At the very top here, we have this green button that says play. If we press that play, it will spawn a character right where we have this player start. And because this has already been set up as a third-person game, it will spawn a third-person character that is inside our project here. So it will spawn this character into the level. So if I press play now, we can see that character. And if I left click in the viewport, I can now treat this as a game, meaning that if I move my mouse around, I can look in all directions. If I press WASD, I can move my character around in all directions. And even if I press jump, the character will jump. So just take this time now to get used to these controls and used to how the character interacts with the environment. This will be very important for later when we start designing our own level and we start wanting to make sure that our character has what's known as flow, so that our level flows around enough and our character and camera do not get stuck on any of the geometry or static or physics meshes. Now let's just talk a little bit about what happens if that doesn't happen, because potentially you may not have the third person character in here. If that happens, and I delete this, I don't think it's going to let me delete it. But when we delete this folder, it will say they can't delete it because it's there. We won't worry about that. We can also spawn from our selected current camera location. So if your character is spawning from your current character location and you don't know why, and you want to switch that off, what you can do is simply go up here to the dots and go to default player start. If this is grayed out, there's a good chance that you don't have a player start in that level. To fix that, all we have to do is go over here to window panes and go to placed actors, which is another window that was docked previously in Unreal Engine 4, and simply go down here to player start and drag and drop that into the level. Now, when we go down here, we should see that we have a player start that we can select. And when we press play, that's where they'll start. This can be very useful for when you're testing out specific parts of the level, or you're working with very tight, intricate scenes and you don't know if the camera is going to correctly spawn your character in the right spot. You can also simulate things. So let's say, for example, I wanted to test out the physics sims of an object. This object here, as you have no doubt seen from the playthrough, is a physics object. So let's say I wanted to rotate it around and then just drop this. I could just go here and go simulate, and instead of having to play the level, I can just see the simulations themselves play out. Another thing you might want to consider doing is having this open in a new window. This is especially important for when you're trying to do a recording, because it allows you to have it as a separate window and control things like frame rate. There are a few more things we can talk about with the viewport here, but in order to do so, I'm going to talk as well about how you can place objects in this level and start building your own level. So down here, you can start bringing things in from the content browser. We're going to start with props. You can see a number of different props in here. So for example, doors and chairs. And we're going to start talking about how you can bring these into the level and start resizing them. When you click on an object, you can see that you have these colored arrows. These colored arrows allow you to move it along a certain axis. In 3D space, we talk about these axes with 3 different letters: X, Y, and Z. In this case, X being backwards and forwards, Y being left and right, and Z being up and down. Different programs may give different coordinates. For example, Maya uses Y as its up axis. But for now, all we need to know is that there are 3 axes, and this is how we move objects along those axes. You can also see the details here changing as I move it. So if I wanted to center this all out into the center of the level, I could just zero these out. However, that means that if we press F, we will soon notice that that object is now inside this object. So we don't actually want to do that. We'll press Ctrl Z to undo our movements and have our static mesh back in this object here. We can also rotate these objects. So for example, if I wanted to duplicate this, there are 2 ways. I can press Alt and then left click and drag the object in the direction to move it, or I can right click on it and go Edit and Duplicate. I can also press Ctrl D to duplicate. This will duplicate the object on the spot, however, and so it's important to make sure that your object doesn't become stuck inside another object. It will offset it slightly to let you know that it is there, but it is something to watch out for. As you can notice, most of these are not the same size. If I want to make them slightly larger to fit this track here, I can click here on this resize button and resize it across these axes. As you will notice, when I'm moving, rotating, or scaling, all of these things snap, and that is that they click into place. The reason it's doing that is because of these objects here that allow us to snap them to a certain percentage. We can either change the percentage or switch it off altogether to be able to allow for more smoother and precise movement, scaling, and rotation. Use this now in order to try and build a small level using the props and get used to going into the level and testing these things out, especially for things like collision, to make sure that your character can't get stuck on any of the objects.